Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Tom Bombadil. I won't explain why. Episode 199, Strategies for Upgrading React Native.
Hey, React Native Radio friends. Welcome back. This is the React Native Radio Podcast. I'm Jamon Holmgren, your host, and I'm joined today by my impressive co-host, Robin. Robin, I'm back in the seat here.
Yeah, you're also very tan. Very tan.
Yeah, I was somewhere with more sun than the Pacific Northwest.
That's not that hard. Although we did have some really nice weather.
Yeah.
I think right as you got back, we had like almost 90.
Yeah, it was a really nice soft landing from being in Oahu. It was fantastic. Obviously, being away was nice. It was a good getaway for us, for the family, but it's nice to be home, back in the routine. And it has been pretty good weather. There's been a little bit of rain here and there, but like I'm looking out right now and it's sunny and starting to get towards spring.
This is my favorite time of year because it's starting to get nice and sunny, but it's not super hot yet.
Exactly. Well, Pacific Northwest is pretty awesome. Of course, Robin and I both live near Portland,
We're a little
Oregon.
biased about
are.
the Pacific Northwest.
Robin, you grew up around here, right?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in Corvallis, home of the Oregon State Beavers.
Oh, yeah. Corvallis, Oregon. I grew up in Clatskanie, Oregon, which is in sort of the top left corner of Oregon.
It's basically Washington.
Ironically, it's north of where I live now in Washington State. I live in Washington State, but
it's the little part of Oregon that just is
bumps
up into Washington. So it's basically Washington.
It's because the Columbia River takes a turn there and, goes out to the sea. So they just were like, okay, follow the river. But we are going to follow the river of conversation. I love your expression with that segue into our sponsorship. This episode is sponsored by Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native design and development agency located fully remotely in the USA. We have years of React Native experience and deep roots in the React Native community. We are the hosts of Chain React, and we publish the React Native newsletter. We also, I don't know if people know this, but we also host the React Native Radio podcast.
Oh, really? I
Did
didn't
you know
that,
Robin? Okay. Yeah, well, that's news. Infinite Red is the best choice for your next React Native app. Hit us up, hello@infinite.red. You can learn more on our website, infinite.red/React Native. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the podcast. We love hearing that. That's always very validating. We are also hiring senior React Native engineers in the US or Canada. So if you are interested in working with us, go to careers.infinite.red and fill out the form. All right, let's just jump right into our topic for today. This is one that's been kind of on our radar for a while that we've wanted to talk about, and we're finally getting to it today, which is kind of fun. It is strategies for upgrading React Native.
Everybody's favorite thing.
Mm-hmm.
Necessary
Upgrading
evil.
your app. Exactly. It is. You have to stay on top of this, especially, we started back in, I don't know, it was a long time ago, React Native 0.17 or something like that.
Yep.
And we're talking, this is a long time ago, and every upgrade was painful. In fact, back in 2018, the React Native core team opened an issue on the React Native community discussions and proposals repo that was titled, "What do you dislike about React Native?" That's kind of a bold way to come into this.
I think it's smart though. You have to know where your weaknesses are. If you don't know what people are complaining about, what the pain points are, you can't fix them. So I think it's a smart strategy.
It really was. It was a brilliant move by them. There were a lot of responses, but the very first one that came in was, upgrading requires a lot of effort. Too much? With a question mark. Upgrading from one version to another is hard and requires a lot of work, especially when you have fallen a couple of versions behind and have to manually upgrade from yours to the latest version by version. And it had 568 upvotes before everything was kind of locked down. There were a lot of other responses for sure, But upgrades was the one that really seemed to hit a nerve there. Do you remember upgrading back in those days? I think you were definitely working at Infinite Red then.
So when I started doing React Native at Infinite Red, I think React Native was somewhere around like 38, 39. I remembered the jump into .40. So I came in somewhere around there. And that was back before all the new tools that they have for upgrading.
Yeah.
But I was still pretty new to React Native on our team. So I don't think I ever had to do a full React Native upgrade on one of our projects until a little bit later, until I was a little bit more experienced. So I don't think I ever had to do one of those really, really painful upgrades.
Right. Yeah, that was those upgrades were legendary. And in fact, what it pretty much did was make people fall even further behind. And it was just it was a vicious cycle. It was like it just kept going down and down with, you'd fall 2-3 versions behind. And now some update by maybe Apple or Google meant that you had to upgrade. And now you're just in a position where it's just really, really tough.
So what was the process actually like back then? Did you basically just read the release notes and then upgrade the version and try and run it and see what happened?
Pretty much. And some people would like spin up a brand new app and just port everything over, which was, a pain in its own right. But others would just, upgrade and see what happens. And then you had to like Google every error and, figure out what was going on. And so the core team decided that, okay, this is not going to work. And there was a blog post published about 6 months later in 2019 talking about what the core team had done. And I was actually a part of this transition a little bit. That was when I joined the core team, was in that kind of range. One of the big things was the Lean Core initiative, which allowed splitting off a lot of internal modules into external community-focused modules. And I actually was the one who split the very first one off. So I took the web view and I split it off into its own module, and then eventually the internal one was deprecated and removed. So WebView, for those of you who've used it, that's my fault for at least the first part. Now, Thibaut or Titoz, Titozzz, as he's known on the web, he has been very, very instrumental in continuing to maintain it afterward. So I got to give him huge credit. But that was a part of the change, was to make it so that, because I think one of the big complaints at that time was, pull requests just hang out for way too long. And there were 400 pull requests, or maybe issues at least, having to do with WebView. And we were able to remove all those and move them over to the new repo. Easier to manage, definitely. Yeah. And then there were a lot of other things that happened during that time. But upgrading was really kind of, I think, more React Native community led. So there were multiple improvements that happened during that time to upgrading, which one was auto linking. So manually linking back then, if you had like a new, like a native module, either on Android or iOS, you had to manually link it. And that was a process that was a little finicky, and especially when you were upgrading, it was prone to issues. It was easy to forget to do it, and there were problems with it quite often. So auto linking was a big deal. There was also another command called React Native diff purge, which I think maybe had existed in some form before that, but it became more officially supported. And what that would do is basically take like the previous version, spin up an app, and then take the new version, spin up an app, and then just do a diff between them. So you knew what had changed. And they then announced an upgrade helper website, which has been released and been out for a couple of years now. Yeah. And we'll be talking more about that. There was also a commitment to making sure that breaking changes and features are published in blog posts for each major release. And I think they've done a good job of that since then. And, there were some other things that were kind of just committed to. Just fewer breaking changes at that point would be a big one because they just knew that this was a pain point.
Yeah, definitely. I think I remember using the diff purge tool once. It was okay. It got pretty manual there for a while because the diff got pretty complicated because, you know, you have a brand new React Native app and you're comparing it to an app that you've added things to and built up upon. So it could get pretty messy that way. But I mean, that's still basically the strategy now, is to like look at the diff between two React Native projects.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that and talking about how we do upgrades at Infinite Red and how what we've kind of found has worked well. We're also interested in listener feedback. So if you listen to this episode and are like, hey, I've got a better way to do this, you know, let us know. We'd love to hear it, and we'll share it with people internally at Infinite Red too, because, you know, there's still room for improvement, I think, in all this. There's also an upgrading documentation page, and I actually do recommend that people look at it. We'll put it in the show notes, but in the official React Native docs, upgrading to new versions is a document that you can look at under the workflow tab. And it goes through what to do to upgrade Expo projects as well as React Native CLI projects. There's the React Native upgrade command, which I want to ask you, Robin, is that something that you've used before?
I have not specifically used the upgrade command. I think it's related to or based on the diff purge. Yeah. It sort of tries to apply the diff automatically, which I guess I avoid just because, I don't know, I like to have more manual control over what's happening to my code base. So I haven't used that upgrade tool specifically, but I've heard that it works decently well if you don't have a super complex project.
Yeah, so that's something that was kind of common when I was talking to people about upgrading. A lot of people said the upgrade command is cool, but it breaks often enough that I don't really trust it. And it also, I feel like I don't have enough control. I don't really know what happened.
Well, it takes a lot of Git expertise to really know what's going on. Like git apply is a pretty advanced Git command. And so it can be easy to sort of lose track of what's happening. And if you get stuck and you start to get merge conflicts and stuff, it can be kind of hard to untangle.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a cool tool, but can sometimes be a little confusing to use.
Yeah. But I like that they released it, though, because I'm sure that there would be some people who maybe are using React Native in a very kind of straightforward way,
right,
where just running React Native upgrade and committing the result just works.
Exactly. Yeah. I think for a lot of, especially if you're doing hobby projects or like playing around with React Native apps and you like haven't built out a really complex application, I think it's probably really straightforward and makes upgrading really easy.
So let me take a step back for a second here and ask, when should you upgrade? Like, do you upgrade immediately as soon as something drops, or, you know, is there some kind of like a little bit of a buffer there?
This is one of those questions where there's often a huge gap between what you should do and what people actually do. Like, do as I say, not as I do. I would definitely say you should, if you have the ability to sort of have that control over what's happening with your app. I would absolutely upgrade every time there's even a minor version change, because each minor version is probably going to be a really easy, straightforward upgrade. And if you just do those regularly, the major versions are going to be a cakewalk because they'll basically just be another minor version. So I would definitely recommend doing it just make a habit of keeping track of the React Native releases and just upgrade all the time. However, in real life, especially if you're working for clients like we do, upgrading is seen as somewhat of a liability, a risk. A lot of clients don't want to fix what's not broken. And so they don't want to budget the time for upgrading when things already work as they are. And so it can kind of be a tech debt thing that gets pushed down the line. And we really do our best to try and communicate to our clients that it will be much less painful and much less risky overall if you just let us do it regularly. And Some clients are really good about saying, hey, you guys do whatever you think is best, and some aren't.
Yeah.
So yeah, it depends. Anytime you have control over your own project, upgrade as often as you can. That's really the best way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I definitely see the hesitancy of clients, the new version comes out and it's like that disrupts the plans.
Right. It takes the place of features you could be building, things that are time sensitive that need to go out. So
it introduces bugs often.
Yeah, I can see their hesitancy. It can be hard to see the long-term benefits above the short-term costs.
Yeah. Now, one idea or one kind of bit of feedback I have around this is if you upgrade regularly, then you build your upgrading muscles, so to speak. You get good at it.
Definitely.
And when you're good at it, then it doesn't take as long and it's less risky. It almost seems like not doing it becomes more risky because then it gets definitely you end up with more problems when you do finally go, not only because you're not good at it, but also because there's just so many versions to kind of jump through.
Yeah, that's really true. It is a skill, and you develop an intuition or sort of a sixth sense for what the various errors might mean and how you might solve them, which can help a little bit in your Googling around.
My recommendation would be, if a client were to ask me, I would say upgrade every version, but like 3 months later. So you have 3 months warning. Like you're like, okay, a new version came out, so now let's schedule it for 3 months down the road. And this is when we're going to upgrade. And then every time, it's just a 3-month delay. One big reason for that is not only can you plan for it, you know that it's coming, but also everybody else will have already run into all the issues and there will be lots of Stack Overflow questions and whatnot that you can just look at.
So if you're taking that approach, you may not end up going to every single minor version because a lot of times the minor versions are fixes for things that were broken in the first time.
Yeah.
So you may actually end up doing fewer upgrades that way, which is a plus.
Now, on the flip side, if you want to help kind of contribute back to the core team and the community, being on beta versions or release candidates can be very helpful to the core team. Like, what problems did you run into when you upgraded to the release candidate? So if you're maybe working on a project where you do have that level of control and you want to be kind of cutting edge and you want to provide feedback, I know the core team doesn't get enough feedback. Not enough people install the RCs. So I do want to encourage people who are in that position where they can do that, like give it a try and then provide feedback.
Helpful feedback.
Helpful feedback. Because like a lot of these problems that pop up and that have to be patched, they could have been caught if enough people were on the release candidates.
Definitely agree there. It's all about what your situation is and what your project is and what your budget is if you're working with a budget. And
yeah, totally. So if it's just a small bump, what strategy would you follow, Robin, to upgrade?
To upgrade small bumps, actually big bump, like large bumps too. But I always go to the React Native Community Upgrade Helper website, which we'll put in the show notes, it's a pretty simple concept. It's really just you select the version that you're on and then the version that you're going to, and it shows you a diff between a newly generated React Native project of each of those versions. So it shows you what changed if you were just to go run React Native new. And so what then I'll do is just go through that diff, and it actually makes it really, really easy. They have ways to sort of check off each file as you go through and say, look, did this one, did this one, because you're basically going to go and apply those changes manually in your project.
Mm-hmm. Which, when you first see that, like I know my first impression was, oh, that's a lot of manual work. But at the same time, if you're careful about it, and one thing that's really cool about this tool is that you can actually click a check mark in the top right and it'll say, oh, I already did
it'll
this.
Check off the file, it'll hide it, it'll show you the next one.
Yeah.
And it seems like, oh, that would be a lot of work, but it's really not unmanageable, especially for small small jumps. It's just something you go through and do. It maybe take you a couple hours. And you have the control of doing it manually in your project in case your project doesn't look exactly like a freshly created one would.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, I'm looking through the latest one, which happens to be 0.63.4 to 0.64.0. I don't know 64.1 is coming out soon, so by the time people look at this, that may be the jump. But you can just kind of see there actually are quite a few changes, but they're pretty small. Like you can just, take this little block of code or add this comment or remove this piece.
And honestly, a lot of them I don't even bother with because some of them are just like boilerplate parts of a React Native app that we don't even use. Like we don't use flow. And so if there are changes to flow config, like we skip those. If you're not using like Flipper or something like that, there's parts that you can skip that don't apply to your app. So it can sometimes be even faster.
And there's some defaults that change. So for example, inline requires became true in 0.64. And if you don't want inline requires, you just don't have to flip that bit.
Yeah. So that's why I like that you have a little more granular control and you know exactly what you're changing in your app and it's not automatic.
It's such a great tool. I'm really, really thankful to the people that worked on it to bring it to us, because it certainly has saved a lot of brain power.
Yes, I really appreciate that tool.
So this brings a lot of changes to like just the base app, but are there changes that have to happen other than that, like third-party libraries, your own code, etc.?
Yes, you should, along with using the upgrade helper, you should absolutely also read the release notes,
okay,
the change log, because there may be changes to various components or prop names or other things that wouldn't be in the base, the base app, that you may need to change because you've used that component in your app somewhere.
The code that's changed is internal, not with the generated app, so you're not going to see it.
Right, exactly.
Makes sense.
So you should definitely read the release notes as well and see if there are any breaking changes that you need to go apply in your app somewhere.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And this, of course, is if you're not using Expo. If you're using Expo, it's actually generally easier to upgrade.
Expo does a lot for you.
Yeah.
Because that's Expo's whole business model. Make things easy.
It really is. I think if you go to reactnative.dev/versions, you actually get a list and a link to all the documentation.
Yes, it should link to the change log, and also if there's any blog posts about major changes, it'll all be linked there.
It would be really nice to link each one to the diff as well. That'd be something to add at some point. From this page. Anyway.
In the upgrade helper? Yeah,
the upgrade helper.
That's a good suggestion. We should put in.
It's an open source website. I'm sure we can, or someone can add that link. So then when you're talking about major versions, or let's say you're way behind, like 5 major versions behind, how would you approach a project like that?
I've had to do that a couple of times. I think the largest jump I ever did was 43 to 59. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, because we sometimes have client projects where we'll finish the app, ship it, it'll be working fine, chugging along. The client will say, okay, see ya for a while. And so the app will kind of stagnate for a year, maybe more. So we'll have sometimes really, really huge jumps like that. So for those, usually I'll start out attempting to use the upgrade helper. I always start there, but usually there's been so many changes that it's pretty overwhelming. Plus, if you're upgrading that big of a jump, you're also going to be upgrading a lot of your dependencies, like React navigation, probably Redux or MobX state tree, because those kind of are tied. They sort of grow along with React Native. So you'll probably be upgrading those as well. And the upgrade helper is not going to help you with that. What I'll do, and this is usually a much longer project, I'll create a brand new React Native app or Ignite, usually an Ignite app, since we're using Ignite.
And just for an aside, for those who are just listening to this and haven't heard us before,
if you don't know what Ignite is, our boilerplate library that we created here at Infinite Red and we use for all of our projects. We will also link that in the show notes.
Exactly. And it creates a new React Native app with all of our defaults kind of baked in.
It has our default stack, some example screens, that kind of thing. But I'll create a brand new app with the new React Native version. And then folder by folder, I'm just going to copy the source code from my app over into the new app. So all my models, my screens, my components, the sort of the core of the app, while leaving a lot of the configuration, the sort of React Native framework part is coming from the brand new app. And then as I go, I'll upgrade React Navigation or our state management library, those kinds of things, and make those changes to make those compatible. It's definitely a much, much larger project. I don't recommend skipping that many versions.
Yeah. But I could see how it would happen because, like you said, people go away for a while. They're focused on other things, and then they come back and want to make some. And you can't just stay on those old versions because Apple and Google also move along, and that's where the versions will keep pace with that.
Yeah, exactly. So you will have to upgrade eventually.
I remember one of the more painful ones we had to do involved us actually replacing the navigation library entirely.
Yeah, that was the same project because we were using React Native Router Flux, and we switched to React Navigation. Yeah, which was it was doable. It was just a project.
So, speaking of Ignite itself, it was a tool developed by a member of the community, Nicholas Soderstrom, who created Ignite Diffbridge. He made it so that it's actually pretty similar to the upgrade helper website for React Native. So from time to time, we'll make changes. Like, for example, I just submitted a PR yesterday removing one of the MobX state tree extensions that we include with the boilerplate that we actually don't use. It's called with status, and it's a cool idea. I think it's meant to sort of demonstrate how extensions work. But at the end of the day, we don't really use it. And so shipping dead code doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I removed that. And when that gets merged and Nicholas updates his repo, it will actually show what I removed. Because we got questions, people, the way that we intended Ignite to work was you spin it up and then you kind of continue on independently and you upgrade React Native independently and you upgrade your dependencies independently. And any changes we make to the boilerplate, well, they're just for future projects. But that's not how people always use it. They like to actually stay kind of abreast of what changes we are making. And so this tool is really cool because it actually gives people a sense. It works the same way as a React Native one. And it tells them, hey, this is what Infinite Red has done, to make some changes recently. And so they can go through and look at the diff and then decide what changes they want to bring back to their own app.
It's amazing how powerful Git tools are for more than just version control. Like this is sort of using Git for something that it wasn't primarily built for, but it's really powerful.
All in all, would you say that upgrading React Native apps now is it getting easier over time, or is it still just a pain in the butt?
It will always be somewhat of a pain in the butt. That's just kind of the nature of upgrading stuff. But it has absolutely gotten easier than it was 20, 30 versions ago. I think there's more of an established process for it now.
Yeah.
And there's tools. We've been doing it a lot longer, and so there's a lot more experience at it and help on the internet. Yeah, it's definitely a better experience now.
And to the core team's credit, they ran they did another one of those issues on GitHub saying, what needs to be improved on React Native, or what's the name of it? It was, what do you dislike about React Native? Another, like a follow-up a while later. And upgrades did not show up on that one. It was not one of the things that people pointed out. So there were other issues, obviously, but kudos to the core team for kind of helping to
They really
smooth out
listened to that feedback and made a noticeable improvement.
Absolutely. I think we'll call that good. Where can people find you to ask for help upgrading, Robin?
I'm on Twitter at Robin_Hines.
Don't really ask her for help upgrading. You can go to our community for that, community.infinite.red. It's a Slack community, and there's a lot of people that will help you. You can also find me at Jamon Holmgren, and you can find React Native Radio on Twitter at React Native RDIO. As always, thanks to our producer and editor, Todd Worth, our transcript and release coordinator, Jed Bartoski, our social media coordinator, Missy Warren. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out, infinite.red/React Native. A special thanks to you for listening today. Really appreciate you joining us today and hanging out with us for this, I don't know, half hour or whatever it was. Make sure to subscribe on all the major podcasting platforms and send this to a friend who might need help upgrading and needs some insight. Reminder, we are hiring. Go to careers.infinite.red, and we will see you next time.